So the the lessons in chapter 3 all deal with probability. Like I've complained before, it's not that um, I like the material that we cover in chapter 3. I just think it's placed wrong. I would move it to the very beginning, or I would like to move it to the very end. Probably the very beginning. I think this should be after chapter 1. I think we should do 132. Anyway, I'm going to stop taking up your time talking about what I think. Here are some vocabulary words you must know. Okay. We're going to be throwing these around all the time in future lessons from chapter 3, and you need to be very, very, very comfortable with them. First of all, we have a probability experiment, okay? And a probability experiment is going to be something that you either actually do or you consider doing. It's the difference between an experimental or a theoretical probability. And the only difference is actually having a spinner that we can spin and see what happens, or we simply discuss or think about what could happen if we did spin it. So that's the difference between experimental and probability, and I mean between experimental and theoretical. And I think that word pops up here again in a minute. But anyway, an experiment is something that you can either do or discuss doing. The rolling of a die, a six-sided, die. A lot of people say roll the dice. Die is singular, dice is plural. So if we just have one, sometimes they call them a number cube. But if we can roll this dice, or here we're going to spin the spinner. So that's we defined the experiment. It's what's actually going to be done. Then the sample space, we need to talk about this word right here. An outcome is what could happen when you roll that die. Okay. An outcome is what happens when you roll the die. Well, it landed on a 2. A 2 is a possible outcome. What happens when we spin this die, or when we spin this spinner? Well, it might land on 7. It might land on 4. Those are all examples of an outcome. A sample space is a list of all possible outcomes. So they kind of did this vocabulary list out of order. An experiment is what we're doing. An outcome is a possibility. And here you could talk about it. This is a verbal explanation. This is those little braces right there. It's called set notation, S-E-T, set notation. And 2 is just a number inside the braces. That means 2 was the outcome. Here we use braces because it's set notation. It's a set of numbers, and these are all the possible outcomes. Sample space is important. Know that vocabulary word. Sample space is a list of all possible outcomes. Sometimes sample space is super easy to list. Sometimes sample space is a huge, ginormous number. Sometimes sample space is known, like we do this one right here. Sometimes sample space has to be calculated. That's another thing we're going to learn in this section, is how to calculate a sample space. Okay, so we've got the experiment, we've got an outcome, the sample space is all possible outcomes. An event, this is going to be given. In other words, you don't have to try to figure out what the event is. They're going to tell you the event. This is always given information, because they're gonna tell you what they're interested in seeing happen. They're going to say the event that they're interested in is rolling an even number. Okay, so an even number from this list of numbers is rolling a 2, a 4, or a 6. Or it could be, the event could be something as simple as rolling a 5. If you're playing craps, what do you want to roll? A 1 or a 7, or a 2 or a 7, or something like that? So that would need a pair of dice, not just one die, to get a snake eyes or a 7. I don't really know what I'm talking about. So this is given information, okay? You won't have to know that. So over here, what would the probability experiment be? Spinning a spinner. That is the probability experiment that you get from just looking at that picture, spinning a spinner. What's the sample space? Sample space is a list of all the possible outcomes, and they're normally written in numerical order. So the sample space is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the sample space. The event, I don't know. I might be interested in an example of an event would be land on 3. Land on odd number. Land on a number less than 4. Okay, all of those are examples. And again, that's not something you have to figure out. That's something that's going to be provided, it's going to be given. And an outcome is what happened when you actually spun the spinner. I found a spinner on StatCrunch. All I had to do was put the numbers 1 through 8 in a list, and then I chose what I choose. Applets. That's what I did. I chose an applet, and then I went to spinner. Okay, so I chose that, and there's a spinner. And the first time I spun it, it landed on 3. So in this case, my outcome was a 3. If you want to spin it again, spin it again. This time the outcome was a 1. So a separate outcome would be a 1. If we spun it 2 times and we listed both of the outcomes, that would be it. Or we could separate them and say it was just the outcome. And don't laugh at my little bracy things. It's very simple. I mean, it's not complicated stuff here. It's just vocabulary. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video and see if you can fill these two out. Okay, for each one of these, fill it out for what kind of probability experiment is it. So let's say that's kind of like question number 1. Identify the probability experiment for these 2 pictures. Identify the sample space. Give me a list of some examples of an event that might be given or that somebody might be interested in seeing happen. And then a few examples of an outcome. All right, and I will pick that up with the beginning of the next video.